Such a vast Athenian empire, long perceived as an invincible democratic metropolis, suffered its ruinous collapse at the end of the 5th century BCE. Its legendary navy was sunk by not only the military might of its enemy Sparta, but also by strategic greatness and the staggering wealth of a distant Persian great king. And this silent, methodical tyrant, though infamously bastardized by his enemies, did that which the king's rivals have known since the time of his fall to him, as the only successful and methodical conqueror could never achieve. Rather than swords, he used limitless gold to control the Greeks and struggle and engineer the downfall of Athens from behind the dark. The tale of this genius, Darius II, started with the dying breath of his father, Artaxerxes. The death of a Persian king set off a violent maelstrom of aspiration in a kingdom stretching from India to the Aegean Sea. Although he left a legitimate heir, the late king raised numerous illegitimate children through his many concubines. One of these men was Ochus, an original name. As the child of a Babylonian woman, Ochus was virtually a political impostor and was silently exiled to become a governor on the remote southern coast of the Caspian Sea. This was meant to be a comfortable but insignificant life, a life far removed from the bloody battles for the throne. But buried in this calm background, the exiled son was enormously ambitious, watching as the disorder unfolded with infinite patience as he schemed against his unlikely ascent to unchallengeable status. His rise increased when he married his half-sister, the mercilessly scheming Parysatis. The old king and his royal wife were suddenly killed, and the legitimate heir was left perilously isolated. Within a handful of weeks, he was murdered by another illegitimate brother, who took over by committing acts of paranoia and terror. An exiled Ochus played a crafty and devastating deception, knowing the usurper would inevitably target him. In his role as the noble avenger of the murdered heir, in place of a declaration of open rebellion, he covered his ambition with the excuse of nobility. He stealthily forged an impervious coalition, convincing powerful governors as well as the usurper's own military commanders. While marching the advancing army to the capital, Ochus preferred subterfuge to open warfare. He and his queen swore sacred, martial oaths of peace to the desperate usurper, swearing he would never die by the sword, poison, or starvation if he would surrender. The usurper took the trap, true to the solemn verity of his oath, even as it destroyed everything behind it. Ochus had his captive brother tossed into a horrible pit of burning ashes, stifling him without spilling a drop of blood. The son of the concubine, now crowned Darius II, was victorious in the capital. The bastard king was jeered at by his rivals, as he would later rule the world to be king. But with other brothers already plotting fresh revolts, his bloody throne was ever dangerously unstable, and he had no other option but to depend entirely on his vast fortune, his treacherous circle of friends, and his fearsome queen. The center of this turbulent court was indeed Queen Parysatis. Historians have labeled her an ambitious loner who was viciously protective of the crown, and the one who really devised her husband's power. Whereas the king loved to rule in some remote form, his queen had her gigantic spy ring in place that was all around her, and that the empire had no means of escaping. She worked with powerful court eunuchs who were also brilliant manipulators, not allowing any insinuation of treason to go unpunished. The secret, proxy-based governance style rapidly made Darius the frightening shadow king. They were soon to be forced to come down under pressure when another of their royal brothers launched an attempted rebellion, the organization supported by hired Greek mercenaries. The king and queen unleashed their most devastating weapon, the imperial treasury. Once the royal army had suffered initial defeats, they just spent their money on the enemy army, giving the mercenaries massive bribes to desert. The rebel brother's fatigue revealed. Under the guise of mercy, he surrendered. The king felt inclined to let him live, but his ruthless queen demanded uncompromising finality. Influenced by her brutal logic, the king doomed his own flesh and blood to this same suffocating ash chamber. The execution was savage, broadcast a cruel message across the empire, but the embers of defiance didn't just go out the window. A prosperous provincial governor in the west soon sparked a huge new uprising. To crush this new provincial uprising, the Shadow King sent out one of his most trusted nobles who played the royal playbook flawlessly. Instead of losing a bitter war, he secretly bribed the rebels' mercenary commander to his side, with a huge reward in exchange for switching sides. In this state, the rebel governor, defenseless, was readily fooled into negotiations, arrested, and dispatched to the capital for execution. But the governor's illegitimate son fled to a port on the coast and continued fighting, drawing in a robust and powerful new patron, the Athenian Empire. In providing military assistance for the rebels, Athens cheekily intervened in Persian matters, and it crossed a dangerous line. the Shadow King had beheld from a faraway place for long while. Athens and Sparta drank each other dry in their own endless civil war. The Athenian provocation enraged him, but he had infinite patience. With a direct clash with the invincible Athenian navy now too speculative, he just waited for his foe to slip. The golden opportunity finally came when Athens undertook an extraordinarily ambitious overseas invasion of Sicily, which turned utterly disastrous. The whole Athenian expeditionary force was massacred or detained, and hundreds of their elite warships destroyed. The Shadow King now recognized the time had passed for watching. With his legendary democratic empire crippled and in life and death danger, the moment to strike had finally come. Feeling his enemy's deadly weakness, the Shadow King engaged in a secret war. He directed his western governors to demand tribute from coastal Greek cities that had served under Athenian control for decades. In order to enforce this bold move, he authorized an unthinkable strategy: a direct alliance with the Spartans. By admitting Persian control over these coastal areas, Spartan shipyards were suddenly flooded with Persian gold to build a massive rival fleet. It was an extraordinarily smartly planned proxy war, but the king's lead governor was a very frustrating ally. Wagering that both Greek powers would tire utterly, the governor pulled a double-edged double game. He trickled out only a little money to keep the Spartans working, but never enough to give them a decisive blow. Frustrated with this delay, as the powerful Athenians began building up strength all over again, the king and his ruthless queen took another decision. They needed a fully implacable champion dedicated entirely to laying waste to Athens, and they found it in their own fiercely ambitious teenage son. Given military domination over all the western provinces, the young prince turned up with a single ruthless focus in mind. He immediately renounced the deceptive balancing act of the last governor and formed an intimate relationship with an amazing Spartan admiral. Viewing the admiral as the mightiest weapon available to crush Athens, the prince entirely opened the royal coffers. When the prince was temporarily called away to visit his ailing father, he took the extraordinary step of handing over his entire provincial treasury to the Spartan commander. The first droplets of Persian gold grew into a flood so inevitable. The Spartan admiral, armed with so much wealth and capability that he would literally destroy the entire Athenian navy if he took his weapon down, built the Athenian empire again. Unlocked in the never-ending riches of the Persian prince's realm, the brilliant Spartan admiral made an impish stroke at the absolute lifeblood of his foe. He sent his huge new fleet to a narrow strait that controlled the essential grain supply feeding the democratic empire, and took a key harbor. In a desperate attempt to outrun the Athenian fleet, they ran as fast as they could and made the critical mistake of setting their base on an exposed, barren beach directly across the water. With nothing in the way of a city to supply them, the Athenian sailors had to abandon their ships and journey inland each day to find food. The next few days were filled with a strange ritual, and every morning, the Athenians rode out to offer battle, and every morning the Spartan admiral just flat refused to step up. Their dread was getting the better of them, and they became dangerously complacent and mistakenly determined that their enemy was paralyzed by fear. They didn't know they were being hunted by a patient predator. After seeing in this daily way, the Spartan commander waited to see if the Athenians would come back to their desolate beach and wander back inland for their foraging. After they dispersed, one shield flashing in the sun made it immediately clear to the Spartans to attack. What ensued was not a fight but a slaughter. The Spartans crushed the empty, unmanned warships with a bare-knuckled, cold-blooded precision. The entire elite fleet was taken over or destroyed with no defense formations in sight, and hundreds of intercepted sailors were executed in cold blood. The dreadful news slammed over the besieged capital in a tidal wave of despair. When its mythical fleet was ransacked and the city was completely cut off from the sea, the starving empire finally surrendered unconditionally, accepting brutal terms that doomed it to eternal decline. After the crushing defeat, the great walls of the besieged city were torn down and its beloved democracy replaced with a brutal oligarchy, and its golden age was completely extinguished. The irony of this colossal collapse was immense. Where the great conquerors of Persia had hitherto failed to break the Athenians with their massive invading armies, the Shadow King had been successful, never leaving his crown. Through recognizing the greatest weakness of his enemy and flooding their internal civil war with massive wealth, the underestimated monarch gained ultimate revenge. Yet the Shadow King may not have lived to appreciate the grandeur of his victory. In the very same year his great rival surrendered, he died of illness in Babylon. In his nearly 2 decades in office, he transformed an empire born in turmoil into a renewed superpower, restoring prosperous coastal lands that had been lost for generations. He was never a classical warrior king, but rather a brilliant political mastermind that taught that unlimited wealth and the quiet cunning of the powerful could tip the balance of ancient politics, the level of the ancient world. But the ruthless pragmatism that anchored his reign also laid the groundwork for devastating future conflicts. The very tools he relied upon to uphold his dominance, his terrifying queen and his fiercely ambitious younger son, would eventually split the royal family apart. The youngest prince, heavily pushed by his mother, was unwilling to accept when the dying king named his eldest son as the rightful heir. This would soon sink the empire back into yet another bloody civil war, one almost guaranteed to ruin everything the Shadow King had fought and built. It took this silent monarch in the end, but how history turned out to be the tale of a man who fought for power, a man whose cunning lies among the darkest corridors in history. The hated son of a concubine showed that gold is the sharpest weapon of all, casting a dark long shadow that would forever mark the end of the golden age of Greece. That very nicely concludes the tale of Darius II. We're really taking you so much closer to hitting a word count target, and your story is very nicely delivered. There are no facts or subheads at odds with the story. We end our episode here today. Come back in the next few hours. If yours was a favorite of mine, please subscribe and share. You are invaluable to me for the comments you make.